pentru această sesiune.
I'll kindly ask President Florin Claudiu Roman, the chair of the Commission for Public Administration and Territorial Management from the Chamber of Deputies of the Romanian Parliament, to moderate this session. Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome you for this meeting at the Palace of Parliament in Bucharest. Dear colleagues, members of the national delegations and of the European Parliament, here I welcome you on this session regarding the cohesion and territorial competitiveness, regional development and equal opportunities of our Interparliamentary Assembly. I won't give too many details about your enlisting to speak, because this is already the third module of the day. Each of you knows the enlisting procedure. You need to write your willingness to speak on a card, and that's all. If you allow me to make a short joke, Chair Stănescu told me we'll have a different kind of meeting. We all wait after this third session. Mr. Stănescu is waiting for us with tasty things and surprises. Ladies and gentlemen, the cohesion policy is one of the most important and most complex policies of the European Union, which has been changed continuously in terms of specific goals and tools for implementation. This policy has as a unique role gathering strategies of integrated development which reunite interventions in various fields, as well as infrastructure, research and innovation, employment, education, business environment, protection of the environment, climate changes and energetic effectiveness, as a part of a coherent policy package addressing the regional context and even the local context, being one of the most visible policies in terms of relationship to the citizens. According to the proposal regarding the future MFF, the cohesion policy has a budget worth 373 billion euros, 30% of the overall EU budget for 7 years. The cohesion policy is the main policy of investment in Europe, despite the budgetary gap left by the Brexit and by the new challenges. For the current period, Romania received around 23 billion euros of the cohesion policy funds, 10% more compared to the 2007-2013 period. On the other hand, we are aware that not all the member states enjoyed an increase of their funds by the cohesion policy. We all hope the money can be used by the member states starting from the 1st of January 2021 for high-quality projects able to use the European funds effectively in order to cut gaps and inequalities on the European continent and to improve the life quality for people. If you allow me, I'll pass the floor to our main speakers and then I'll open the dialogue. And I kindly ask my two colleagues, the two speakers, to all observe the 10-minute time lapse. I now pass the floor to Mrs. Mihaela Toader, Secretary of State in the Romanian government, the Ministry of European Funds. Dear lady, you're kindly invited to take the floor, and then Mr. Eric von Bresca, Director with the General Directorate Regional Policy and from the European Commission. Thank you, Chair. I thank the organizers of this important event for including the Ministry of European Funds on the list of guests and speakers for this session, precisely because we all experience an important time for the future policies of the European Union. The main moment is right now because Romania is the president of the EU Council, and on this occasion, Romania tries to gather the positions and the oppositions of all the member states regarding the MFF, as well as the general regulation for financing the investments of the cohesion policy for the next 7 years. On the other hand, here we are in a very difficult moment, and I talk here about Brexit and the consequences of this unpleasant moment over the budget of the European Union. And I talk about the need to adjust the processes and the needs of our institutions, as well as the global challenges where international stakeholders get stronger and stronger, while Europe needs to strengthen its cohesion in order to cope with the new challenges and to become truly a true competitor on the international market. The cohesion policy remains one of the most important investment policies, which, according to the functioning Treaty of the European Union, reduces disparities and increases convergence, helping the regions to get developed. This is the policy creating competitiveness not only within the EU, as I was telling, but it also creates competitiveness for the EU and for the member states from north to south, from east to west. We were used from the cohesion policy standpoint to talk about net contributors and net receivers, but it has been proven over the last years that all the member states had something to gain from this policy. It wasn't any state which wasn't touched by the beneficial effects of the cohesion policy regarding their effect on the macroeconomic factors, since many regions were developed, regions which before the intervention were much underdeveloped. We are now talking about 5 policy goals at the EU level, goals which should be financed by all the member states. This is a very important fact because this is the way for us to coordinate the available resources, to gather our efforts to support this common European project. But let's not forget we have the communities behind us, the communities in all the member states, which of course observe these policy requirements, because we all need a more connected Europe, a greener Europe, a more sociable Europe, a Europe to be closer to the citizens and more competitive. Yet let's not forget the needs of each and every region. Let's adapt our regions, our measures to help each region to catch up with the gaps and to support their own citizens. Beyond such policy goals, I'd like to remind you that the regulation proposal includes for the very first time, and in a much steadier way, we talk about Europe for citizens. It is for the very first time when the local dimension of the cohesion policy is underlined. The support for the communities is emphasized to identify their own needs and the measures to support those needs. It is, of course, a challenge for each member state to manage to bring the necessary balance between regional needs and everybody's willingness to become more competitive and to support innovation and modernity. We still consider the cohesion policy provides us with the necessary tools, yet the authorities from the member states need to come with their own input to support the beneficiaries, to simplify the procedures, and to pursue the investments in such fields which, on the one hand, will help the citizens of each state to live better, to be more convergent, as we like to tell, And on the other hand, we all need to be European citizens with equal opportunities. We saw that the other topic, and we consider it an important topic, is related to the macroeconomic strategies. We are about to accomplish this plan. The macro-regional strategies had an important, a tremendous impact. Those strategies, and I mean here the main strategy in which Romania has got an important role since it is the president of the EU Council, the Danube strategy, and the other strategies provide the other states with the opportunity of supporting each other, of implementing projects together in order to increase competitiveness for a more larger, more broader, a broader territory, and to strengthen the physical frontiers and borders of the EU. The establishment of this macro-regional strategy was a welcome exercise. We tried and we managed to observe the principle of the three no's. No additional financing, no additional rules, and the same goals. But orienting ourselves towards the national borders, let's keep our attention on the national borders, because this is a wonderful tool to help the national states reducing divergences and gaps for the member states to design projects for the benefit of the citizens. This is why the regulation proposals aim at those macro-regional strategies. We already have some experience in terms of management authorities to design such a mechanism supporting the beneficiaries, implement such projects in keeping with the macro-regional strategies. In the end, I'd like to remind to what extent our calendar is very tight. As the chair said earlier, we all want for us to be able to implement projects starting from the 1st of January 2021, but we need to have the legislative framework in a stable status by then. The Ministry of European Funds, in charge with the cohesion policy and which represents Romania within the EU Council, wishes by the end of this term to get a partial general approach, that is to have the mandate from the member states so that our Finnish colleagues may start the dialogue and so that we have the legislative framework adopted by the two co-legislators in charge with it. We all depend on what will happen with the multi-annual financial framework. We are committed, the member states as well as the European Commission, European institutions are committed to reach an agreement on the multi-annual financial framework in terms of debits. We all hope this happens, but all this depends on the willingness of the member states wishing to have some developments in the matter so that we don't have any significant delay as it was the case for the 2014-2020 period. Thank you for your kind attention, and I can answer any of your questions. Thank you, Secretary of State, for expressing the standpoint of the Romanian government and for managing to observe the 10 minutes assigned to you. I now pass the floor to Mr. Eric von Breska, the Director with the General Directorate of Regional and Urban Policy of the European Commission, and I kindly ask you to speak for 10 minutes and not more.
First of all, I would like to thank the Romanian Parliament for inviting me. It's a big honor for me to be with you today. And also for organizing this conference, which I think comes at a very timely moment. In my short presentation, I will cover 3 questions. 1, what are the economic trends which we observe in Europe, which underpinned the Commission's proposal for the future cohesion policy. 2, what are the main changes which we propose for the future? And 3, a few words about the budget, because at the end of the day, it's about money and everybody looks only at the money. When we look at the trends at the European level, I want to start with the good news. What are the good news? The good news are that after the economic crisis, Europe has experienced 7 years of uninterrupted economic growth. This has allowed us to provide jobs to a record number of people. So now in Europe we have more than 240 million Europeans who are in employment. We have created more than 15 million jobs since 2013, and unemployment has fallen to a record low of 6.6% in the EU. But there's also, let's say, a negative side to this story. One of which is that growth has not been equally distributed. And what we see are huge differences in living standards in many member states, which are in fact increasing. So what we see are that big metropolitan areas are benefiting from the opportunities of digitalization, of globalization, but there are many other parts of countries who are falling behind. And we have already seen that this has led to a political discontent. So people feel that they are left behind, that they have no opportunities, and we have seen this already manifest itself in certain election results, which obviously is worrying for us in the European Commission. We also see that innovation, which is going to be the driver of economic growth and jobs in the future, is concentrated in a few spots in Europe, and it's not kind of spreading across Europe, across the regions. And we also see that the workforce of Europe is aging, and that many young, educated people are leaving their regions in order to find new jobs elsewhere. Now, obviously, this is going to limit the future growth of Europe. And therefore, the Commission is of the opinion that we need to address these problems, and we need to maintain investments, so a strong cohesion policy to strengthen the competitiveness of all regions in Europe. So this is the starting point of our reform. So let me just give you 2 or 3 examples of what we want to change in the future. And I think Michaela, she has already mentioned one, which is a focus of the investments on a limited number of priorities. I mentioned already innovation. Well, why innovation and what does it mean? It does not mean that necessarily all of Europe needs to be a world leader in artificial intelligence. But what it means is that all regions need to adapt to new technologies and try to use new technologies in order to incorporate them, so to strengthen the strengths which they have to be competitive in the future. It also requires skills, because without a skilled workforce, we will not become more productive. So we need to speak about education, we speak about training, about lifelong learning. And it also requires better connections. And when I speak about better connections, I mean on the one hand transport in countries like Romania, for example, but I also speak about access to the internet. Because how are you supposed to open a business in a remote area if you do not have access to the internet, so which allows you then to participate in the common market in the European Union? And last but not least, what is also important for us is obviously climate transition. So a fair and a clean energy transition, which means a focus on energy efficiency and renewable energy in the future. Let me give you just one more thing which we also want to change, and this is in fact creating a lot of discussion in Brussels with the member states. And this is the link with other EU policies, and most importantly with the European semester. You may know that in the European semester, the Commission analyzes the economic developments of each and every member state each year. And this all results in a country report, which has just been published a few weeks ago, and is followed up with country-specific recommendations, which are adopted by the Council of the European Union. Now, in the past, These reports and recommendations focused on structural reforms, they focused on public deficits, they focused on macroeconomic imbalances, but funnily enough, they didn't focus on investment, which is quite bizarre when you think about it, because what you invest today is tomorrow's growth and jobs. And therefore, we have decided that in the future, there should be a strong link between the economic governance of the European Union and investments of the European Union, meaning also cohesion policy. And this means right now that in this year's country report, you will see that we have made concrete suggestions what we think the money should be invested in each member state, which we are now, in fact, discussing as we speak. And I understand that my commissioner is here in Bucharest on Friday to discuss with the Romanian government and other stakeholders what should be the priorities of investment in the future in Romania, but we are doing it in all capitals across the European Union. Let me then just finish on a few words on the budget. As I think it has already been pointed out before, the budget will shrink according to the Commission's proposal, but it will remain substantial. And in fact, countries like Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece will even see an increase. So they will receive more money in the future than what they have right now. Because obviously these are the countries where there are still very many challenges, and this is reflected in the Commission's proposal. However, what concerns us very much these days is the fact that most of the money, or much of the money which is available right now, is in fact not absorbed by the member states. We are now have completed 5 years of implementation. So we started the current programs in 2014. There were some delays at the beginning, but we started in 2014. We're now in 2019. So 14, 15 till 18 has been completed. And we have paid 25% of the total budget only. This obviously is a problem. It's not only a problem for us because it makes the budget very difficult to manage because we don't know how much we need to pay to the member state, but it's also a problem on the ground because if you do not invest, there cannot be any growth in jobs. And therefore, obviously, one of our pleas is, and one of our proposals for the future is that we need to accelerate implementation of the funds on the ground. And we are ready to give a helping hand by providing support to administrations and to the stakeholders to improve their capacity to do so. I come to the end just to once again thank the Romanian presidency for the excellent work. Indeed, what is done in Brussels, in the Council, and also with the Parliament is impressive. We have made a lot of progress. Having said that, as Michaela has pointed out, we are running right now in a problem because the Parliament will have elections and then a new Parliament will be put in place, which means that there won't be any agreements anymore under the Romanian presidency. But we would obviously hope that under the Finnish presidency, we can then still proceed very quickly in order to find agreements. But much, of course, will depend when our leaders will be able to strike a deal on the future budget, because at the end of the day, it's about money, and if there's no agreement on the money, we cannot finalize our rule book. So, as I said, what we now plead is not waste any time. So basically do 2 exercises in parallel. Work on the legislation and at the same time start already discussing with member states about their future programs and about future investment priorities in parallel to be ready in 2021 when the new program period starts. Last words. I'm always feel very honored when I go to parliaments because I understand that parliaments are very supportive because this policy is very close to the citizens because, as you know, it's built on multi-level governance. It means that all the stakeholders are supposed to participate in preparing and implementing projects, and we also think it's the most visible expression of solidarity in the European Union. So thank you very much for your support and thank you very much for your attention.
Mulțumesc foarte mult pentru intervenție și domnului.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Thank you for the accuracy of the figures you presented and for the encouraging message towards the government of Romania and the Parliament of Romania. Now I suggest we start directly the exchange of opinions. There are 4 colleagues who want to take the floor. Please limit your interventions to 3 minutes, and those who are addressed questions, please answer immediately. The first person to take the floor is our colleague from the Czech Republic, the Chamber of Deputies, Mr. Adam Karos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As always, it's a great pleasure to be here in Bucharest. Thank you for the invitation. And first, I would like to say that the Czech Republic generally supports budgeting for a cohesion policy within a single subheading. This means without European Social Fund Plus, in order to maintain continuity and make the strong budgetary role of cohesion policy more visible. Secondly, the Czech Republic is ready to agree to a certain reduction of the cohesion envelope. However, the downturn must be gradual rather than radical. In this context, the Czech Republic welcomes that the methodology for calculating allocations includes a safety net system, but the allocations to the selected member states is still really dramatically reduced. The Czech Republic belongs to a group of states with the largest drop in allocation, with a decline of 24%. This is the largest reduction among Central and Eastern European countries. Czech Republic does not agree with this reduction, and we call for a safety net adjustment. And finally, the Czech Republic will support variants that will lead to a return of the rule N+3, an increase in pre-financing amount, and an increase in the share of EU funding. The Czech Republic supports that the amount of co-financing can be set at member state level and not by category of regions. We believe that implementations would be simplified for states whose territories include all 3 types of regions. Czech Republic also requires that EU member states can choose the level of co-financing at the start of the period. Thank you for your attention.
Vă mulțumesc și eu foarte mult.
Thank you very much for your intervention. I will now ask Mr. Mombresca to contribute on budget and envelope and tell us his answer to the Czech Republic. Thank you.
No, okay, thank you. Well, the issues which you have raised, I mean, first of all, they concern the budget. And the budget, in fact, will be discussed by the European leaders at the European Council, and this will not happen, as far as we know, before autumn. And this also includes issues like co-financing, pre-financing, N+2, N+3. So all of this is kind of a separate block, which, as I said, will be discussed and decided by the heads of state and not by the ministers, in a sense. Now, on your request, in particular, to reduce the losses for the Czech Republic, I mean, as I mentioned before, we have tried to operate in a context where the budget is decreasing. while still focusing, obviously, money on the poorest. And here I would hope you would agree that the Czech Republic does no longer belong to the poorest countries in the EU. So here we clearly have other countries which have a lower income per capita. And therefore, if your economic situation improves, the budget goes down, and you want to focus on those which are the poorest, you obviously see that certain other member states will not have the same allocations as before, which is in fact a good thing, because it means that your economy is developing well. Just maybe one remark on the numbers, because it's not the first time that obviously I hear this. In the current period, we had countries which had losses of 45%. So we had a safety net at minus 45%. For the future, we have proposed a safety net of minus 24%. So we think we were much more generous than to some of the member states who have seen right now cuts of almost half of their allocation compared to what we have proposed in the future. So once again, what we have tried to do is to come forward with a balanced proposal which takes account of the new realities and which limits somehow the losses as far as we can. But we do obviously understand that not everybody is happy, and I would assume that the Czech Prime Minister, President, whoever represents you at the European Council will make this case very clear, and if he's very convincing, he may be able to change all of that. But this is right now goes beyond what we can still decide, because the Commission has made its proposal and it's now in the hands of the leaders of the European Union to decide.
Vă mulțumesc foarte mult.
Thank you very much for your intervention and for your answer. If you allow me, I will have a very brief comment as well. I wish the public discourse of all partners in the European family should only include the word European. I think we can speak of poor or richer, but we are all members of the same family, and I believe that countries like Romania or Bulgaria, they are not poorer. They had a more oppressive communist regime which involved a different type of organization. So obviously from this viewpoint there is quite a big distance between the more advanced democracies and the two newer members of the European family. So we all know what we have to do, and it would be fairer if we did not treat budgetary problems in terms of poor and rich, but in terms of real needs and in terms of the solidarity we all need at European level. I apologize for this intervention, but I felt it was needed, especially for Mr. von Perska. We move on, and I will invite now Mr. Tomislav Paninic from Croatia, from the Parliament of Croatia, to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will use this opportunity to alert on difficulties of the life at the external border of the European Union, whose population mostly are rural one, and they are not enjoying benefits of the EU membership to boost growth and cohesion. Reinforcement of the more strict controls at the external border due to security reason, which is welcome in the most part of the EU, is very harmful for the border citizens living in the border area. Access to the public services, such as medical care, schools, is declining. Our citizens, businesses, authorities are facing more and more specific difficulties. They are requesting measures that go beyond just EU funding, as these difficulties cannot be addressed through the simple financing or a loan financing. The EU should override and reduce complexity and cost of the living at the external borders. How border citizens can take full advantage of being EU citizen when they have problem of crossing border to work in another state, or the workers to come to the EU external border areas, or what happens when, for example, they broke his or her arm and they need medical care, and the closest medical institution is on the opposite side of the border. The effects of the reducing external border and obstacles will contribute to the social economic development, but also integration of the most countries which are also candidate countries. I am aware that EU adopted its communication boosting growth and cohesion EU border region, but this document is insufficient for external border region, and we expect much more efforts in that term. Thank you.
Vă mulțumim foarte mult pentru intervenție.
Thank you very much for your intervention and for your message. Obviously, this is a major concern for all colleagues within the European Union, and definitely the issue you raised is on the public agenda of decision makers. There are other similar issues if we look at your neighbors, and definitely political decision makers will find an answer to your question which we are going to pass forward. Thank you very much. If you allow me, we move forward, and I invite now Mr. Nunzio Angiola to take the floor from the Chamber of Deputies in Italy.
Un'Europa più intelligente, più verde, più connessa, più sociale, più vicina ai cittadini. Diversi aspetti delle proposte presentate dalla Commissione ci sembrano condivisibili, e in particolare quello,
namely simplification, streamlining of rules to access funds. However, in the last few months, we've been reporting a few problems, and we have been suggesting a few suggestions. Let me recap them. First, we need to review the method used to allocate resources to make it more equal and balanced. More attention should be paid to weighting to the importance of social and economic conditions of each country. Second, we need to go beyond the macroeconomic conditionality mechanism. I am an economist, and I can tell you that it would end up with generating pro-cyclical effects, thus slowing down the development of domestic demand and investment. Let me remind you that the European Parliament has recently opposed keeping macroeconomic conditionality. Third point, as to flexibility, we hope for a review of the planning method, the so-called 5+2 method, and a return to a 7-year time span as to streamline planning procedures. Fourth point, this point is very important. It deals with three main aspects, namely convergence, structural reforms, and growth. We believe that recommendations targeted to each country, to each member state, country reports, should not be considered a priority, and we need a new orientation to planning. Planning should be reoriented. Instead, we should focus on the conditions and focus on peculiar features of each region or community. Fifth point, as to the increase of national co-funding shares, we will support this proposal if we are able to deduct these items of expenditure from the deficit in the framework of the Growth and Stability Pact, Maastricht agreements. Last but not least, we support the introduction of the criterion of presence of migrants to allocate resources within the new cohesion policy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Vă mulțumesc.
Thank you very much, Mr. Angiola, for your intervention, and I will ask Eric to comment on the technical part.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your contribution. On the allocation of resources and the indicators used, I can just say we try to be as objective as possible, so we only take indicators which are harmonized across Europe. And most of the weight of the indicators is GDP, so gross domestic product, and unemployment, so labor market data. I think what needs to be borne in mind is, I mean, if you have a constant budget and the budget is not increasing, the second you touch on allocation indicators, you will always have winners and losers. So what one country wins, the other country loses. And obviously this is a very difficult discussion then, because as I said, the cake is not going to increase, but the distribution of the cake will change. So once again, this is an issue which at the end of the day will end up with the European Council, so with the heads of state who will have to look at this, and they will then have to decide whether there will be adjustments or not. I think this is all I can say on that. On the question which is related to the Stability and Growth Pact and the co-financing and whether this should be taken into account when the deficit, the public deficit is calculated. I mean, this is not so much a question on cohesion policy, this is a question about the Stability and Growth Pact and the rules which are related to the Stability and Growth Pact. And indeed, the question here is, would you consider that investment should be taken out of the national public deficit calculation? But once again, this is a question which cannot be addressed to us. It needs to be addressed to the ministers of finance who are discussing the Stability and Growth Pact and its implementation and its rules. Macroeconomic conditionality, I do understand that this is not very popular, in particular in parliaments. I just wanted to give you a bit of reassurance. I mean, this exists right now, this provision, since 2014, and we never had any situation where funds were suspended because of non-compliance under the excessive deficit procedure. So personally, I consider this more to be a threat which is never used or so. Once again, this is an issue which has been put to the leaders, so they will have to decide on this as well. So you see they have a full agenda when they meet to discuss the budget, whether they want to maintain macroeconomic conditionality or whether they want to drop it. Last but not least, and this is an important issue, this is about the 5+2, so whether there should be a mid-term review of cohesion policy in 2025, let's say, or not. We think that there should be one. Why? Because we think that nobody knows now, in 2019, what will be the problems and the difficulties and challenges which Europe will face in 2024. When we started in 2014 with the new programs, the current programs, nobody foresaw a migration crisis. Nobody. And what happened then was, when we then went to the member states and said, I mean, there's a migration problem, would you want to use some of the funds, of the European funds, to address this problem? Basically, everybody said no. And it's not only because member states said no because they didn't want to, but it's just because all the money was already committed to projects. And once you have a legal contract signed with a company, then obviously it's difficult to pull out and say, well, I need this money right now because I have a migration problem. And this is the reason why we said we want to put some money aside for the last 2 years, in 2026 and 2027, to be able to react to such unforeseen circumstances. This does not mean that the money will be lost or the money will be moved somewhere else. It just means that there's a reserve which is in the national budget, so it stays with the member state, but which would allow to address new problems if they emerge. And if not, then you could just continue implementing the programs as they are constructed from 2021.
Mulțumesc.
Thank you, Eric. I will ask now Secretary of State Toader to contribute. Thank you. Just two more things about this midterm review for 5+2. Because recently in the Council, Member States gave a mandate and somewhat made this provision more flexible, this provision on reallocation of the last 2 years, starting from the proposal of certain Member States. Currently they are discussing of half of the allocation for the last 2 years, which would be left under this umbrella of flexibility and reallocation. And what I want to emphasize for Eric as well, because I've known him for many years, obviously there might be new needs. We are doing programming for years, including in the pre-accession years. We know that, and I'm sure that all member states know if there are new needs which require new funding, they must be aligned with the objective of the cohesion policy in the treaty for the functioning of the European Union, more specifically territorial convergence and reducing gaps and disparities, not any other new priorities which are outside the policy.
Mulțumesc, Mihaela.
Thank you, Mihaela. I invite now the next speaker from Ireland, Paul Daly, to take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And at the outset, just to thank yourself and all the Romanians for your kind invitation. It's been a very productive discussion over the 2 days on CAP and cohesion. And I suppose coming from Ireland at the moment, irrespective of the topic, the conversation always turns back to, unfortunately, Brexit. And it's with that in mind, I'd like to just discuss the importance of the Cohesion Fund and the benefits through the ESIF, the ERDF, Interreg and Peace Plus, the fantastic positive input they have had and these funds have had on building of peace on our island, and nowhere more particularly than in the border regions, both sides of the border. And it is vitally important for those regions post-Brexit, irrespective of the outcome of Brexit, that these funds would still be available, that existing projects would be able to continue and future ones be funded, albeit that because of their nature and their integration of two diverse communities, one half of the community will possibly no longer be a member of the family. So for this region, while our country as a whole has benefited enormously from the Cohesion Fund, this border region has definitely benefited more so than possibly anywhere else in Europe. Not only has it created economic and structural progress, but it has consolidated, promoted and ensured a long-lasting peace for over 20 years. So without being too parochial, this is the most important aspect of cohesion for us. And unfortunately, we're in the vacuum in that we don't know until next week, or maybe much farther beyond, what will the outcome of Brexit be. And I suppose on another note, just in conclusion from my involvement in some projects, you stated yourself earlier that while there was only 25% of the fund drawn down, I genuinely think that some simplification would help that percentage. Thank you very much.
Foarte corect. Mulțumim, Paul, pentru...
Precisely. Thank you, Paul, for your intervention. And we now finalize the list of persons who wanted to contribute. Now I will ask Mihaela or Eric if they want to add anything. Mihaela, please. Thank you. Just in the end, I would like to establish a link with Ireland. I remember when Romania was getting ready to become EU member state and to benefit from the cohesion policy, although maybe many people from the member states would think we would take the example from Poland or other countries. The first visits were made by my colleagues in Ireland, and the very organizational model, even some of the financial model, is inspired by the Irish model, which is indeed a success story in terms of EU fund absorption. What I'd like to highlight in the end is that beyond regulations and allocations and principles, everything comes down to implementation. Most often, the citizens and EU fund beneficiaries request simplicity, effectiveness, and this is why one of the topics raised by Romania as President of the Council of the European Union last week, including during the informal meeting of general directors in charge with the cohesion policy. So the topic was, let's all assume to begin implementation, even though regulations have not been finalized. Let's use the money from the current financial exercise to prepare projects. Let's support the development of our countries in correlation with other policies, even though right now the common agricultural policy is not so obviously aligned anymore with the cohesion policy, and it seems to have different objectives. But I don't think it's a fair model where the urban and the rural should have two paces, different paces. I think we should use both policies to increase convergence and cohesion, and we should equally support the rural and the urban areas. And Romania is ready to support the implementation of the common agricultural policy, financing from the cohesion fund priority actions which were indicated by our colleagues who manage the common agricultural policy. Here I'm talking first of all about the rural development. We have money to support social inclusion measures in rural areas where my colleagues from the National Rural Development Program are supporting investments. We support additionally the investment in people. Thank you very much for inviting us. We believe this is a great opportunity for all of us to hear our opinions, to try to find common grounds, because as Eric mentioned, it is up to the leaders to set the budget, but I think it's time we all reach a compromise, even though we see bigger or smaller budget cuts for different member states, but it is in the interest of every citizen to begin implementation. Thank you. I will ask now Eric to have a final intervention if he believes he should.
I agree fully that peace is the most visible and important symbol what cohesion policies should be and is all about. And we in the Commission are 100% committed to continue with peace, and I have some hope that also our UK colleagues would do the same, but I would not want to hide my concern about many other cross-border programs, because this is not the only cross-border program trying to bring together different communities from different borders in that area. So let's keep our fingers crossed that it will work out smoothly. I agree very much with Michaela. I mean, at the end of the day, what matters is that that we simplify the rules, that we have less rules, that we give more responsibility to the people on the ground. In particular, where we see it very much is in those member states which have very small allocations. I mean, they obviously say the administrative burden which we have for this little amount of money which we receive is just not proportionate anymore. And so we try right now to go in this direction as far as we can. But I just would want to also say a word of caution, even though this is very close to my heart, since this is EU taxpayers' money and we will need to report on it to the European Parliament, there will always be some rules and some controls. So it's not that all of this will just go away or so. But I agree very much at the end of the day what matters is that this is not becoming too complicated so that the beneficiaries don't understand anymore how this whole policy is supposed to work. Thank you.
Mulțumesc, Eric.
Thank you, Eric. Please allow me to have a short final intervention as chair of the Public Administration Committee in the Chamber of Deputies. I've had the privilege of being elected at local level before being elected as a member of the parliament. So I started local elections, county council, and then the Parliament of Romania. So I represented first my locality in the Committee of the Regions, and then within all European regions. And while Romania, as a new member state, was discussing European support for infrastructure, water, sewerage, and highways, about waste. Obviously, more developed countries had finished all these, and they were discussing about green energy and environmental friendly development. The times and history made us different in terms of local development. I believe we are all European citizens acting in good faith. We show solidarity, and from this viewpoint, please understand the message passed by neighboring countries, especially Eastern European countries. There is a need for unitary development. There is a need to remove development gaps everywhere. Everybody would love that this beautiful house of the European Union should have all rooms, and excuse my example, should have all rooms nicely painted with comfortable furniture, so that we are all proud of our home, Europe. This is why I request on behalf of my colleagues in the parliament, on behalf of the government, you should have more understanding for a country which not only receives but also contributes with 17 billion to the EU budget. Thank you very much for your presence. We are honored by your presence. I want to thank those who took the time to be here in Bucharest, and in the end, I